These are real concepts of what the Xbox 360 could have looked like. These were made in late 2003 when Microsoft began defining what a successor to the original Xbox would be. The Xbox 360 wouldn't even enter production until August of 2004, which even for back then was an extremely short turnaround period. And this isn't even considering the software they were also building up alongside the hardware. You have to remember, before the iPhone, the Xbox 360 was one of the first consumer electronic devices with an app store. Microsoft wanted to start the next generation off with a bang, and their number one priority was releasing before the PS3, coming out with a stellar software suite, and coming out cheaper. Today, I will take you on a journey through the insane 2-year development cycle of the Xbox 360 console and give you a glimpse at how incredibly determined Microsoft was at taking the gaming crown from Sony. Development on the Xbox 360 began in early 2003. In February of 2003, planning for the Xbox 360 software platform began. In that month, Microsoft held an event for over 400 developers in Washington to recruit support for the system. Also, in that same month, Peter Moore, who was the former president of Sega of America, joined Microsoft to lead the teams on the new console. Microsoft started working on the Xbox 360 architecture and began looking for partners for key components. And in August of 2003, ATI signed on to produce the new GPU, and in early 2004, IBM also was selected to design the CPU of the console. The story of the CPU development is a bit interesting. The Xbox 360 had a PowerPC based CPU, and while the PlayStation 3 had a much more complex CPU stack, at its core, it was also a PowerPC based processing unit, and just like Microsoft, Sony also chose IBM in addition to Toshiba to develop these chips prior to Microsoft's commitment. The cores of the Xbox 360 processor were actually developed using a slightly modified version of the PlayStation 3's cell processor architecture. IBM's involvement in both processors meant that Microsoft benefited from IBM's research and advancements in multi-core processing and parallel computing that had already been done during the designing of the PlayStation 3's CPU. And in early 2004, Microsoft found out that Sony had been working on a hyper-advanced processing chip and had hints that the price of the chip had to have been astronomical. And inside of IBM, Sony and Toshiba engineers were unknowingly designing and verifying logic that would be going into the Xbox 360. All three of the original partners had agreed that IBM would eventually sell the cell processing unit to other clients, but it didn't occur to Sony that IBM would sell key parts of the cell before it was complete and to Sony's primary video game console competitor. The result was that Sony's R&D money was spent creating a component for Microsoft to use against them, and the deal only got worse for Sony. Both designs were delivered on time to IBM's manufacturing division, but there was a problem with the first chip run. Microsoft had the foresight to order backup manufacturing capacity from a third party, and Sony did not, and they had to wait another 6 weeks to get their first chips. So Microsoft actually got the chip that Sony helped design before Sony did. While the processor was being completed at IBM, there was a glaring issue that Microsoft could not avoid. The price of manufacturing the console would be too high to hit their $299 price point. One of the main internal battles that was being fought in 2004 was the amount of RAM that was going to go into the console. The original plan was to have 256 megabytes of RAM to power the device, but if they went with 256 here, games would have had much lower texture quality, and since Microsoft wanted this console to be the device to own going into the HD era, they had to have at least 512 megabytes. Increasing this would lead to an even higher price point though, and it wasn't as simple as just increasing the amount of RAM in the device. When you're designing a console, you have to factor in the costs of the RAM increase, the extra power you need to utilize the extra RAM, the cooling for the extra RAM, and the certification for the cooling for the extra RAM. The list goes on and on. But the decision was made when they brought in one company to demo the difference between the two configurations of memory. Can you guess what game they saw that solidified the decision here? The game they brought in was two versions of Gears of War. One that was utilizing 256 megabytes of memory and one that was utilizing 512 megabytes. In the 256 megabyte version, the textures weren't as sharp, the draw distance was limited, and the overall graphical fidelity was noticeably lower. In contrast, the 512 megabyte version of Gears of War looked stunning. It had high quality textures, rich lighting, and expansive immersive environments. The 512 megabyte version was capable of handling the game's complex models and textures at a higher level, allowing for a more visually compelling experience. It was immediately apparent to Microsoft that they needed to increase the RAM in order to deliver games at the same level of Gears of War. This fidelity would be a necessity if Microsoft wanted to take on the HD era of gaming. So now that Microsoft has increased the RAM on the console, the price would no longer be hitting their $299 goal. So what could they possibly do next to ensure that they could still one-up Sony, but also still make some money on their consoles? This is where the removable hard drive was envisioned. Microsoft would create two different versions of the Xbox 360. The Xbox 360 Core started at $299 and it came with no storage solution at all, a wired controller, and standard definition AV cables. The standard Xbox 360 model would come with a 20 gigabyte hard drive, a wireless controller, HD AV cables, a headset, and an Ethernet cable at a higher price point. Additionally, having no hard drive on the Xbox 360 Core would mean that it would not be able to play original Xbox games via backwards compatibility. While these were pretty extreme cuts, the hard drive would be removable and available to purchase separately at a cost of $99 for 20 gigabytes. Allowing for customers to eventually be able to have the full Xbox 360 experience at a later date. And in August of 2004, design had finally finished up, partners were brought on, and the spec sheet had been finalized. Production had finally begun on the console. In January of 2005, the first CPU silicon had started to arrive, the crown jewel of the Xbox 360. And by February of 2005, testing would begin on the new hardware that was coming in. Everything was going super smoothly so far, and the Xbox 360s were coming off the production line extremely quick. One Xbox 360 was being built every 4 seconds. These consoles were being built in record time, except for a minor hiccup that was occurring during their hardware testing from March until May of 2005. They started to build up a bone pile of Xbox 360s that were having various types of issues and wouldn't work. Out of 100 consoles, Microsoft would only make 50 to 60 that would work properly. Microsoft started to build a bone pile of over 600,000 Xbox 360s within the next couple of months. The issues that the consoles in the bone pile had weren't just isolated to a single cause. There were multiple failures, including power-related issues, heating, and any other issue that causes the device to not pass every single hardware test Microsoft had in place. But while the bone pile was growing, Microsoft was confident they would be able to iron out these production issues before launch and officially announce the Xbox 360 at E3 of 2005.
That future starts right here, right now. This is my Xbox 360. It's here, and it's on.
While excitement was brewing, Microsoft was hard at work at fixing their bone pile. From May until September, they were able to chip away at a large portion of the broken machines in an effort to meet the extremely high demand. Eventually, they got through the challenges in the production pipeline and they were able to catch up to the demand. Microsoft were able to launch the Xbox 360 in November of 2005, a full year before the competition. Sony was ramping up to start announcing the price of the PlayStation 3 6 months after the release of the Xbox 360. And according to Peter Moore, they knew that Sony was going to be arrogant, but Microsoft was still extremely paranoid about what price Sony was going for. And then they announced it.
The next generation doesn't start until we say it does. In North America, the PlayStation 3 will be available at retail for $599 US, $659 Canadian.
Holy cow, we just got handed this generation.
We were high-fiving each other, people were crying.
At this point, Microsoft knew that they won the generation. Gamers would not want to be spending $599 for a console. Adjusted for inflation in 2025, this puts the PlayStation 3 at almost $1,000 today. The next day, Microsoft would take the stage at E3 and announce even more games, including Halo 3. They seemed untouchable at this point.
Couldn't be more excited to be here because we're delivering the next generation of gaming right here and right now, with titles that are nothing short of spectacular.
But around the same time as E3's press conference, Microsoft noticed a small issue occurring with the customers' consoles. They were failing in unexpected proportions. Something had gone terribly wrong. When this started happening, Microsoft had no idea what was going wrong and what they needed to fix. They were, of course, replacing consoles for affected customers, but when they did, the replacement that they would send out would also red ring. They just could not come up with a fix for this issue. And while they had originally reduced the bone pile they had originally built up during production, during the red ring of death, the amount of 360s in the bone pile would skyrocket to almost 1 million consoles. They got to a point where they weren't figuring out what the issue was fast enough, so they had to completely shut down production of the console. While this video isn't about the red ring of death specifically, it was due to a major problem during the manufacturing of the GPU. As consoles would go from hot to cold over and over again while gaming, it would stress the connection between the graphics card and the chip that communicates with the motherboard of the Xbox 360. But now that Microsoft had identified what was causing this issue, what would be the cost in fixing it?
We had a $1.15 billion problem.
Peter had to go to Steve Ballmer and basically say, hey, bad news, I need $1 billion to go fix this issue.
I'm expecting to be ripped to shreds. To the credit of Steve, and I can still see him looking at me right now, he said, do it. Just do it. We'll figure it all out. We'll take the hit.
Microsoft will spend at least $1 billion to repair serious hardware failures with its Xbox 360 video game console.
Once Microsoft secured the funding from the CEO at the time, Steve Ballmer, they worked quickly to replace all affected Xbox 360s with the correct fix. This was a make or break moment for the Xbox 360. If they hadn't gotten the approval from Steve Ballmer, the Xbox brand would be dead in the water and Sony would win the video game industry by default. By 2011, the issue was entirely resolved with new revisions to the Xbox 360 GPU chip, and Microsoft would go on to sell over 85 million consoles by 2024. Xbox nowadays is vastly different from the Xbox team that made the 360. Back then, they were fighting for not only first place, but their survival. But nowadays, it seems like they've bowed out of the console marketplace completely and are now in a much more software-focused business. Sony, on the other hand, is currently dominating with a massive lead in sales against the Xbox. Only time will tell if Microsoft will get the same ferocity as they had during the Xbox 360 era once again. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was a little bit different than what I've put out so far, but if you have any questions, feel free to let me know in the comments down below, and I'll try my best to answer them. Be sure to like and subscribe as my channel is pretty small and any support helps. Thank you.